yourselves. Feel free to unmute yourself should you have any questions or want to share, as we want the session to be interactive. Also, our session ends at 11 a.m., but we'll be around for some time afterwards should you have more questions, comments, or would like to get some insight regarding our curriculum. Kaya will also throw in our contact information in the chat. And as Alicia shared, my name is Amrita Serene Tak. With me is Kaya Dugan, and our platform is called Better Ed Guide. We'll share more details about Better Ed Guide and our backgrounds in just a bit, but we like to kick the session off with a quick poll. So please either use the raise hand function in Zoom or just simply raise your hand. How many of you have heard the term ableism before? All right, decent chunk of you, that's great. How many of you have used the word ableist to describe a problem perceived as unequal? Not as many of you, which not surprising. Thank you for taking this poll. Very few people actively frame problems as ableist. The word just hasn't entered our vocabulary like other words describing other forms of oppression have. Frankly, that's why we're all here. For those of you who filled out our pre-session survey, thank you. We have tailored this session towards what a majority of you want to get out of it, understanding language and etiquette around disabilities, and we'll discuss the others as well. Please note that given this is an abridged session relative to our standard one, we'll be providing a high-level overview on this topic. Also, as you can appreciate, given the feedback, many of you are coming to this session with varying levels of knowledge on this topic. So we appreciate your patience as we try to address the range of understanding and experiences around disabilities. This next slide is a brief overview of how we've structured our conversation today. And now a little bit about Better Ed Guide and our platform. Our goal here is really to empower the community regarding disability studies and awareness, to encourage teachers, parents, students to ask questions. It's okay to ask why and have that open dialogue. In doing so, you build an understanding and hopefully create a sense of respect regarding differences. Who are we? So as I mentioned, my name is Amrita. I was truly introduced to the world of disability back in 2019 when my son Jovan was diagnosed with a rare genetic syndrome associated with certain developmental delays. When Jovan's older sister, Sahana, started attending an independent school in the DC metro area, I realized she's going to have this great education, but there may not be any intentional exposure to include disability studies and awareness during her academic journey. Sahana would likely grow up as I did, thinking about those with disabilities in a different other category. So in thinking about our own ignorance, we thought we may not be alone in the need to have a better understanding regarding the breadth of disabilities. Having an understanding around the language, the etiquette, the historical context needed to be more aware and more consciously inclusive. Please know that while we've done extensive research in this space, our learning curves remain steep. We ask all of you to please share as we learn best from one another. Kaya?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kaya Dugan, and I was introduced to Amrita through a mutual friend as I was doing similar work at my children's independent school in New York. I have 3 kids. My youngest, my son Luke, was diagnosed with cerebral palsy 11 years ago. And that's when my learning about the different disability communities began. Similarly, after realizing the need for more general awareness around disabilities, I helped implement a program in the K-4 classrooms at our school, mostly driven by parent volunteers. And one of the major takeaways for me was realizing how many of the adults, both the parents and the teachers, lacked basic knowledge around disabilities and disability communities, including appropriate language, etiquette, and some basic scientific and historical information. I think many of us grew up in a generation where disability just wasn't really spoken about, and therefore this information was never provided to us. Several of the adults that I worked with expressed gratitude for the education that they received themselves while delivering the content to the students. So these experiences have helped inform our focus and the offerings that we're working on at Better Ed. So true to our mission, we recognize that people engage in education and these types of sessions in different ways and may need accommodations. For those of you that did not have a chance to fill out our pre-session survey, if you do have any accommodation needs this morning, please just directly message us. If you need to periodically get up and move about, please feel free to do so. And as we get started, we ask that you take a moment to read through our rules of engagement. Most importantly, just remember we're all still learning, myself included. It's more than okay to ask questions, make mistakes. The reason why we started this platform is because of our own lack of awareness and experiences. So we ask for everyone to allow for their own and each other's vulnerability. And I know we're on Zoom this morning, but despite that, we'd love for this session to be interactive. So we would love your active participation and in helping us generate meaningful conversations and co-creating this environment. So please don't hesitate to share your perspective or ask questions at any point.
Great, thanks, Kaya. We have a true false survey for you all to fill out. If the statement is usually true or you've never thought about the statement before, please note true. Conversely, if the statement is false or rarely true for you, please note false. We'll give you a few minutes here to fill it out.
I don't think I can respond to that. Is anybody else having trouble responding?
Is it not working?
You just need to restart the poll.
Okay. Relaunch poll.
Yeah.
Did it work?
Okay. Well, I still can't respond, but maybe some.
Anyone able to respond? Oh, you are? Okay.
Good. Okay. Maybe it's because I'm a co-host.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna share the results. There you go. Amrita, you're on mute.
Thanks. Anyone want to share what you're thinking when responding to these questions? Any aha moments? Well, as you may have noticed, we've highlighted some examples here where able-bodied and or neurotypical people may take for granted. Another example that comes to mind are ride shares. How often do we think about how someone in a wheelchair, for example, may access an Uber or a Lyft? I have another example. There is an independent school in this area that provides a book regarding the school's history and philosophy to all incoming families. Last year, a new family joined the school, and the father of one of the students has quadriplegia. Being handed a physical copy of a book is not helpful for this father. He had to ask for a digital version of the book, and after some scrambling, the school provided one. This was certainly a learning experience for all, including, of course, the school, to be more aware of all of its stakeholders. So Kaya and I came up with these statements really based upon our own biases and experiences. If you think about when you all were growing up, how many of you remember kids with and without disabilities studying together, learning together, playing together? If I think about my earliest recollection with disability, I grew up within the Brooklyn public school system. and kids with disabilities were labeled into special ed. I was never mean, but nor was I particularly nice to my peers. I kept my distance because that's what you did. Now, if I may, I'd like to bring your attention to a few of these statements. For example, the first one. Many folks I've encountered when sharing my son's diagnosis tell me that they're sorry. They're sorry he has a diagnosis. Sorry? Sorry for what? I'm not. If my son has a tougher life, it's because of how society has been programmed to think. Often we think of disability as tragic. Why can't it just be? Regarding number four here, by viewing people with disabilities as inspirational, if you think about it, you're actually objectifying them. Some folks within the disability community call this inspiration porn. People with disabilities are living their reality like everyone else. They do not need applause for what people without disabilities do every day. Some of our other thoughts around this exercise included, there's clearly built-in ableism in our society and privilege associated with being neurotypical and/or able-bodied. When there's exposure to disability, it can drive awareness and help combat implicit biases and ableist attitudes. That almost seems natural, right? That our experiences inform our empathy, or rather our desire for inclusivity. I'll share an example. When President Bush Sr. was in office, he was adamant that a bill like the ADA be on his desk to sign. Now, some historians surmise that it was the president's experience with disability that drove his behavior. In his formative years, he was very close to an uncle who was diagnosed with polio and was in a wheelchair. Two of the president's children, one died of leukemia at the age of 3, and the other was diagnosed with dyslexia. Arguably, the president's willingness to fight for this marginalized group came from his experiences around disabilities.
So what is disability? What does the word mean? We're going to stop sharing for a moment and attempt a group exercise with the whiteboard. So Alicia was giving me a few tips before we started, so let me share that. We'd love for you to just share kind of your thoughts on what disability means, maybe a word association. If you look at the left-hand toolbox, the one in the middle, the sticky note, if you just click on that and you can drop it in. And then another helpful tool, as Alicia mentioned, is the undo button in case you accidentally do something or delete someone else's. But if you could just, and this is anonymous, just share with us any kind of word association or thoughts around what disability means, what it is. Okay, great. I love that someone put normal in quotations. Normal is a word I'm trying to remove from my vocabulary. And if any of you ever get a chance, there's a great book called Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney, which is really fantastic. Support needed. That's a great thing to say. Maybe you need additional support. Neurodivergence. Yes, we'll talk a bit about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. Differently able, but not different or not normal. People that need support to be successful as they can be. Yeah. We're going to go through language in more detail in a minute and kind of what we're thinking around which words to use, nowadays as you're talking about disability. Great. This was wonderful. Thank you. So we're going to switch back now to the presentation. If you give me one moment. So thank you for participating. So as you all kind of mentioned, there's a lot to account for when we talk about disability. Some are physical, some are cognitive. There are some that are easily visible and others that are invisible. And there are many different ways to define it. So I've got some examples here that range from a dictionary to medical associations to scholars and disability activists. I think why it's important to look at these is that each of them provides us with a different perspective of the same word. And we'd like to call your attention to the explanation in bold at the top there. These are our disability researchers that we're quite fond of. And they say disability is a form of human variation and an aspect of the human experience. Why we like this one is that it employs what is known as the social model, excuse me, the social model of disability, which defines the word disability as the interaction of an individual body, whether its condition, perhaps an impairment, right? Physical impairment, cognitive impairment, but the interaction of the body with its surrounding environment. So think about this example. If you were a person with hearing and you were living on an island with only people who are deaf and use sign language, then you would be the one with the disability, right? So disability is really the person in the body, perhaps an impairment, and its interaction with its environment and society. So we feel that only by looking at disability through this lens can we really see kind of all of the possibilities and create a truly more inclusive society. Oops, sorry. Having a little technical difficulty here. My mouse, there we go. So what is ableism? One barrier to this more inclusive society is ableism. As we mentioned, most of you have a sense of what ableism is. We just like to take a moment here to highlight our main takeaway, which is that ableism, we strongly believe ableism remains a broad socially accepted form of discrimination, which is ironic because if you think about it, in reality, what we're all what some refer to as tables, temporarily able bodies. Most of us will experience some form of disability at some point in our lifetime, usually through the function of aging. So the language, we found that this is really helpful to kind of get into the details here. The next few slides provide some guidance around some of the preferred language and etiquette relating to certain disabilities. I apologize up front if some of this seems obvious to some of you, but it's really important that we say these things directly when talking in this space. And hopefully each of you will gain at least a few new nuggets of insight. As with all identity language, the use of words is dynamic over time and personal, but there are a couple of themes. In general, one should try to avoid words that attribute value or evaluations to life with a disability. So examples of this would include confined to a wheelchair or suffers from dyslexia. Instead, just be matter of fact, person who uses a wheelchair, person with dyslexia. Which brings us to the next point. Many people prefer the use of person first language, where you specifically use the word person first before the disability. So examples would be, they are a person with a learning disability or a person who is blind. People first language describes what a person has, including a disability, doesn't define who a person is. But again, this is personal. For example, Emily Ladau, this chart here comes from her work. She's a writer and disability advocate. She chooses to call herself a disabled person. So we suggest, you lead with person first language, but as you all mostly know, you always would defer to what and how someone identifies for themselves. Here's some more language suggestions from another source. These individuals are researchers who've done extensive work in disability studies. Why I like this chart is it provides some context in the purpose column. So you can take a moment here and go through it. I'll just pause here for a moment and just, if anyone was surprised by anything they saw, or if they have any questions, now is a great time to ask me.
Kaya, do you see Kaylee's question in the chat?
I'll take a look now.
Yeah, I can say it now. I just didn't want to interrupt, but I was wondering if you've ever had experiences with the disabled community themselves preferring identity first language. I think this, I'm referring specifically, I think, to like autistic communities and sort of making the shift towards more identity first language. Again, it is a personal preference, and we always need to defer to what folks want to call themselves. But I also have the majority of the time, it seems like the preference for them themselves is identity first language, as it doesn't separate the disability from the person. And I'm wondering if you've had that experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely people who with preferences on both sides. And talking in this space, I've been, I don't want to say corrected, but people definitely have different preferences. I think overarching, the disability communities are very individual. There's also the deaf community that, they have, there's a whole deaf culture, lots of personal phrases they use, deaf gain. So there are a lot of differences kind of within the communities, but I think if we, in looking at the research kind of at a higher level across all of them, most of the time they prefer the person first. So we say lead with that, but yes, I think if anyone has kind of a deeper experience within a community, there are a lot of subtle differences within specific disability communities, definitely. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, great. We're going to switch now to some etiquette themes. The first, ask before you help. Just because someone has a disability, don't assume that they need help. If the setting is accessible, people with disabilities can usually get around just fine. Offer assistance if the person appears to need it or asks for it. And if they do ask for help, you can ask how before you act. It's often very helpful to get that clarification. Be sensitive around physical contact. Some people with disabilities depend on their arms for balance or use a cane, so we wouldn't want to touch or grab them, even if your intention is to assist or guide. You could knock them off balance. We shouldn't pet guide dogs. They're working and they can be distracted by us. This is an important one. Consider equipment part of someone's person and refrain from touching it. So this would include things such as wheelchairs, canes, adaptive technology. I read an example in a memoir of a person with a disability. When they were a student, they used a wheelchair, but they did get out of the wheelchair and sit at a desk in class. And the teacher would then use their wheelchair as kind of a prop. They would put books on it or lean on it. And it was incredibly distracting to the students and really kind of prevented them from fully participating in class. And I don't think the teacher was even aware that they were doing that. So we like to just call that one out and just remember, it's important to think of any assistive devices as part of someone's actual person. Be mindful while communicating. Always speak directly to the person with a disability, not to their companion, their aide, or sign language interpreter. If someone has a disability affecting their speech, we should not finish their sentence. Instead, give them the time and space to do so themselves. If someone's speech is unclear, it's better to ask them to repeat themselves if you didn't understand what they said. This is better than making an assumption of what they said or dismissing them and saying, oh, never mind. They're communicating and they want us to know what they're saying. Don't make assumptions. Disability does not mean inability. So, assume competence. People with disabilities are the best judge of what they can or cannot do. So, we try to avoid making decisions for them about participating in an activity. And just because something appears one way, it may not be. If they're in a wheelchair, they may still be able to walk some distance. They may or may not have use of their arms or other parts of their bodies. We have to be careful not to make assumptions about someone's cognitive abilities based on physical limitations and vice versa. For example, sometimes the speech of people with cerebral palsy can be difficult to understand. And often others make kind of an assumption about their intelligence, but their speech is not a reflection of their intelligence. And most importantly, there are a number of invisible disabilities that you would not know someone has just by looking at them or even interacting with them. So again, it's important not to assume. I recognize these tips are very general, and there are plenty of great resources with more details about specific disabilities and specific disability communities, and we can help direct you if you have questions. And finally, just respond graciously to requests. When people ask for an accommodation, don't view it as a complaint. It shows that they feel comfortable enough to ask for what they need. And if someone corrects you for something you do or say, try not to get flustered. We talked about this a moment ago. It's happened to me many times working in this space in terms of identity first, person first, even certain words, because things are changing over time. And we all make mistakes, and sometimes they aren't even mistakes. There often isn't a clear right or wrong way to handle things. So try to have grace with yourself and with others.
Great. As Kaya just shared, language is important. There's clearly built-in ableism in our society. It's so pervasive. It's part of our everyday language, even when we do not realize it. Have any of you ever used any of these colloquial phrases? I have, as probably as recent as a few months ago. Even when we may not intend to be ableist, our words may say otherwise. These common phrases have ableist innuendos. So for example, phrases like, some phrases equate the disability to ignorance, such as the blind leading the blind or tone deaf. Others may alienate members of the disability community, such as the word upstanding, for example, alienating someone in a wheelchair. In our experience, within the world of DEI work, the term blind spot is sometimes used when communicating how people may be unaware of inherent privilege. And I'm sure the intention is not to be ableist, despite the irony and connotation of using the phrase. Ableist language contributes to stigmas, even when that is not the intention. Language is important. We need to be cognizant. So why is this important? Well, we figured you all wouldn't be here if you didn't think this topic was important, but there's also ample evidence-based research on why disability studies is important. And here's a sampling as to the why. This may be obvious now, but teaching about disability is essential to undoing the ableism that is so rooted and pervasive in our society. It's never too early. The sooner we incorporate concepts around disability studies in our classrooms, the sooner young learners can build empathy and awareness. Successful inclusion occurs when it is incorporated in the curricula throughout the school year, just like any other subject. Repetition, repetition, repetition. People with disabilities contribute to innovation and the overall betterment of our society. Now, I originally come from a finance background, and I'm sure some of your financial advisors talk about the value of diversifying your investment portfolios or your 401ks. Similarly, there's value in the diversification of thought, how people with varying backgrounds and experiences contribute to society, innovate, and problem solve. More about this and how it ties to the idea of universal design in just a bit. I'll pause to see if anyone has any questions or thoughts they want to share. Okay. There's a saying in the disability community, nothing about us without us. Kaya and I are derivatives of the community as we don't personally identify with a disability directly ourselves. We thought it's important for you to hear some experiences directly from the members of the disability communities. We've created a video where members of different disability communities share their experiences and perspectives and provide insight into things they wish all members of society knew about their disability. Dr. Solomon has been a professor of biology at Gallaudet University for over 2 decades. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and serves on master's and doctoral committees for research on increasing the participation of deaf and hard of hearing people within STEM. Can you share some do's and don'ts you wish the public would know about deaf and hard of hearing etiquette?
If you find out somebody is deaf, for example, maybe you're talking to us and you don't realize that we're deaf, and then you say, "Oh, I'm sorry that you're deaf." Or sometimes they'll say, "Never mind," and they'll stop saying whatever it is that they were trying to say. And I want to know what you were trying to say. It's important. So instead of saying never mind, do continue to have that conversation and switch the mode of communication that you're having. Maybe write a note back and forth, text, or even type it out. I'm happy to answer your question. For example, if somebody is, driving or walking down the street, they might say, "Where's the grocery store?" I can answer that question. I can tell you the grocery store is, just down the street. All I need is for somebody to change the mode of communication. Also, when you are interacting with a deaf person who has an interpreter, ask your question directly to the deaf person, not to the interpreter. The interpreter is going to interpret for the deaf person, and look at the deaf person that you're talking to, not to the interpreter. It's important to have eye contact with the person you're having a conversation with, not the interpreter. And this is our language. This is how we communicate. You know, it's functional and it's very important to us. I think often that when people say comments like that, it feels like they're not recognizing, you know, that person is there. So for example, you know, when I work in the science field, somebody comes up to me and they'll ask me about a sign rather than my work. And I have a lot of research work that I do in the science field and science environment. And instead they're making it about the language that I'm using. And I'm a deaf person first versus a researcher first. So those are some of the do's and don'ts that I would share when it comes to etiquette of interacting with a deaf person.
Dr. Silverman is a disabled activist and a social scientist who is passionate about improving public understandings of life with disabilities. What do you wish society understood and/or appreciated about blindness?
Well, I guess this goes back to what I was saying earlier. I wish that society would understand that blindness is not a death sentence. It's not sad. It's not scary. It's just a normal part of human diversity, and that blind people are capable of engaging in all the same kinds of life activities that sighted people engage in. We might do things a little bit differently, but we can work, we can have children, we can participate in sports, we can enjoy leisure kinds of activities. We can go to movies and listen to movies that are audio described, or with friends and family describing what's going on. We can enjoy movies, we can enjoy art, we enjoy traveling, all the same kinds of things that everybody else enjoys.
Thank you. Could you share a specific example of when you experienced ableism?
So my husband is sighted, and when we were dating, he was renting a basement apartment. So there was a landlord who lived above him, and sometimes I would come visit him, and so the landlord saw me come in and go downstairs and visit him, but the landlord didn't really know me as a person. He just knew that I was blind and that I used a cane. And my boyfriend at the time, told me that when he told his landlord that he was going to move out so that he and I could start living together, the landlord made a comment to the effect of, "I know you're a nice guy, but you can do better than that." And I consider that to be ableism, and I think it's interesting because it affected him, and he definitely had, I think, a lot of feelings about it, but it also affected me because this landlord, and I'm sure he had the best of intentions and thought he was being kind, but he made a judgment about me having never spoken to me or had a conversation with me. It was just based on my physical appearance that he saw through the window as I was going downstairs to visit his tenant. He made an assumption that I would not be a good partner for his tenant, or that his tenant was dating me out of kindness or something like that. And so I consider that to be ableism.
Tony Budaval was diagnosed with autism as a toddler. He received his undergraduate degree at the Art Institute of Sacramento and majored in media arts. He currently works for Amazon. Tony, can you share what misconceptions exist about autism that you wish were debunked?
Yeah, people just think we live in our own world, but what we really look for is an opening to join in on everyone else's conversations.
Can you share some do's and don'ts you wish the public would know about autism etiquette?
See, young adults in particular don't like to be talked down to as if they were children.
What do you wish society understood and or appreciated about autism?
Yeah, we are creative and we can contribute to society.
Great. Does anyone have any thoughts they want to share after listening to those speakers? Anything that struck a chord with you or any questions? Okay. I think we'll take a 5-minute break so you guys can yeah, we'll put the timer on so y'all will know when the 5 minutes are up. See you back in 5.
Rooms. We'll give you 10 minutes in your group to discuss the scenario and the probing questions, and then we'll get back together as a larger group. And at that time, we'll ask a representative from each of the breakout rooms to kind of share the scenario and the thoughts and ideas that your group came up with. There's a link, Amrita put a link in the chat. If you could copy that link, it'll take you to a Google Drive folder. And in that folder, there are the case studies. And when you get into the breakout room, you want to look at what number breakout room you're in and look at the corresponding number case study. So if you're breakout room 2, you would do case study number 2.
Can you remind me how long you want these breakout rooms to be?
10 minutes, please.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Got it.
Does
Okay.
anyone have any questions before you go?
Okay, you should see an invitation on your screen to join a breakout room. If you don't have an invitation, you can go ahead and speak up and I'll move you into one.
Oh, there's 3 rooms, Alicia, 3 rooms. I think you have 4 here.
I do have 4. It's because we had talked about putting 3 people in a room.
We're in, yeah, you want to just, let's do 3. Sorry.
Yes, fine.
Sorry.
All right, so let's move them to group 1 and move them to group 3.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and then Chris is not in a room, but I will put him in a room even though he's not there. Oh, that's interesting. Julian didn't join a room. He just decided to, oh, he's still in the room with us. There's Candace.
Hey, so we're in group number 4, but there is no case study number 4.
Yeah, we're reassigning now.
Okay.
Thank you. We only have 3.
So where would you like them?
Just put them in, just distribute them to any of the other rooms. We only have 3. Yeah, we have 3 rooms. Sorry.
So put them in room 2, for example. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, got it.
Okay so far?
Specialists, other people like that can help you kind of within the school or maybe in the larger district or associations that you have. And yeah, you brought up a great point about kind of changing up deliverables. We're going to talk about universal design for learning in a little bit, but there's lots of ways, as you mentioned, not just children with executive functioning or ADHD challenges, but all children. It's really great to kind of give them a different opportunity to express what they've learned, whether that's through creating videos, other projects. Laurel really liked art. One of our advisors, when she read this, said, you know, sometimes students with ADHD, if they like art, it's really helpful for them to kind of doodle while they're note taking. So kind of encouraging her to do that and just finding different ways that help her, you know, stay on task and really scaffolding her and to help support her. Any other thoughts around this one? Okay, great. I'll share the summary for case study 3.
So in case study 3, we have Sarah, who has a PhD in psychology. She's well-traveled, loves to hike and cook. She's been born blind and uses a white cane to navigate her environment. Her family moves to a new area, her kids are in a new school, and Sarah wants to be more active within the school community. She hits it off with Michelle at a parent association meeting, and Michelle's hosting a party and is reluctant to invite Sarah, given Sarah's unfamiliar with Michelle's house. Michelle's also unsure regarding how other parents may feel or react to Sarah. Do we have any volunteers from group 3 to share your thoughts and ideas around the probing questions that were presented?
I can say a little bit about what we discussed. I think the first thing we noted was just in Michelle's case, I think it could simply just be a matter of her not feeling comfortable acknowledging her own ignorance about the situation. We noted that can be a problem across many different conversations and many issues. Just simply being able to admit that you're not an expert on something and you might not know what the correct answer is can be a huge block to actually finding a solution. So it could be something as simple as Michelle just talking to Sarah and saying, hey, you know, I'm feeling like I'm unaware of how I can best support you, or you know, how I can just be a better friend for you. So even just simply opening a dialogue with Sarah could be helpful. And also Michelle just she could also do a little bit of her own work. She could, you know, read other stories and about other people who experience blindness and kind of consider how she could approach the situation better for her friend. There were a few other things. Maybe my group members can fill in what I missed.
Yeah, I think that we touched on fear and ignorance are nothing really to be ashamed of. They kind of come with the human package. And so in responding to thinking about Michelle, Reagan was very gracious to assume that it came out of not knowing. We talked a little bit about parenting. I was talking about how parents accepting that parents are in and on a journey in understanding how to navigate those waters with families and children, and just you know, it's a challenging time to know. But again, that being forthright with that awareness in yourself, like hopefully in that parent community, there is someone else who might offer to her, like, how can I help you with the gathering, you know, and maybe give some insights. That's what I'm hoping there'll be a bridge, because I don't know how Michelle, if she doesn't initiate those things for herself, knowing her own understanding of her, where she sits with these assumptions or these fears or this ignorance, then how will she get there? And I'm hopeful that somebody else in the group will bring her along and help her feel safe to speak.
Great, thank you. You guys, you know, hit it on the head. I mean, that's exactly what we were thinking when we were putting this case study together. You know, it was perhaps, we like to think it's perhaps fear or ignorance that's driving Michelle's behavior. You know, first and foremost, we recommend Michelle to commute directly with Sarah. You know, it's okay to ask, you know, that's the whole point, you know. And also Michelle can do, as you mentioned, Reagan, to do some research on etiquette, right? How do you approach you know, someone in the situation? And you could just say, hey, look, I'm not sure, but I did a little research. This is what, you know, what I found out. Is this okay? And also we also thought about how Michelle can maybe even have an icebreaker at her event so that the parents can get to know Sarah and build a level of comfort and friendship there. Great. Well, does anyone have anything else that they want to share, or? Okay, let's move on.
Just wanted to yes, just add to that discussion of fear. You know, I think I see so often with our parents at our school that really it is fear that drives them. Fear of their own insecurities, fear of their own acceptance, fear of how to properly, you know, work with another parent or a child. And I think having patience for those parents is important as well, and helping guide them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do. I think often if people don't know the right thing to do, they don't do anything.
Uh-huh.
So what that does is it prevents, I mean, I can't tell you how many times this happened to my son over the years. We're in a playground and, you know, a kid will be like, why is he wearing those braces? You know, and the parents just grab them and, you know, and pull them away. And it's like, no, you know,
Right.
because they're afraid their child's doing or saying the wrong thing. And it's, yeah, it's because they're, again, they don't know what to do. It's fear and ignorance, but it's what we're trying to do is give them enough awareness and confidence to engage.
Yeah. And say, it's okay for your child to ask questions.
Totally.
You know, please come, let's talk.
Right.
Because I do think people are, I don't know, it's kind of a Pollyanna thought, but people are innately good and they want their children to be good and kind, and they just don't know how to execute it. So anyway,
Yeah, it's a great point.
It's okay for your kids to ask questions, and it's okay for you to ask questions as well.
Yes,
Because none of
yes.
us have gotten this, or at least, you know, we haven't gotten this formal education around this topic, and it's been so hushed, taboo, you don't talk, you don't stare. And we need to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here. Great. I'm just a little worried about timing here. Let's move on to the next section.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks again. So let's now focus on how to integrate disability awareness within the school environment. First and foremost, normalizing concepts around disabilities and simply talking to students about inclusion is essential. Our first section here talks about creating more inclusive environments. Take yourself through your student's day. How can the school community help? How can the school community on an enterprise level structurally make accommodations both physically and virtually? So for example, ergonomics, right? Something as nuanced as simply being intentional about seating can make a huge difference for various types of learners and students with disabilities. Some neurodivergent students may benefit from different seating locations or seating types. Other ideas around accessible spaces include having accessibility maps, having a dedicated faculty or staff member to address disability-related questions or accommodations. Ensuring that all electronic and physical deliverables from the school are accessible. This type of accessibility extends not only to the students, but to the broader community as well. And I'll share an example. At an independent school in this area, a 5th grade teacher in class created a video that was shared with the guardians of the students. It happened to be that 2 of the students had parents who were either deaf or hard of hearing in the classroom. The video could have easily been made with auto or closed captioning, but it just wasn't something that was considered. It's also important to ensure flexibility around deliverables, and I believe someone had just touched upon this idea of universal design for learning. So this cartoon on the left really drives the importance of assessing students' knowledge through different modalities. And so instead of having every student adapt to meet the requirements of a particular teaching style, recognizing the value of perhaps varying the elements of teaching methods and evaluations to better suit the abilities of all students. We like to think that teachers are like architects. Anything you design or teach has to be accessible to your constituents or students. Otherwise, what's the point? And so we all know students learn in different ways. So it's critical to keep this idea of universal design for learning, or UDL, in mind. This strategy not only benefits students who may be neurodivergent, but all students, since we know all students learn in different ways. UDL focuses on 3 key areas: engagement, the why of learning, how to make the content you're teaching relevant, valuable, and authentic to the students; representation, the what of learning, using different learning mediums to maximize learning and impact. So this could be text, video, hands-on learning, audio; action and expression, the how of learning. So UDL, it suggests giving students more than one way to interact with the material and to show what they've learned. So for example, for a student like my son who has fine motor challenges, maybe he can benefit from writing part of an assignment and then delivering the rest orally or via a video medium. At the end of the day, it's not about determining how smart a student is, but rather what makes that student smart. You are their architect, you are their steward. There's a lot here, and this is just a high-level overview. We can provide more ways on how schools can be more proactive around inclusivity, but just know that To ensure successful learning and broader inclusivity, a cultural shift with intention needs to start with faculty and staff. Also, don't underestimate what you can do. The smallest change can have a lasting impact. So now next to ideas around curricula integration. Integrating and normalizing concepts around disability early in a student's education is critical to build awareness and empathy. So for example, when we teach about the 5 senses, how about include the idea that sometimes not everyone has all 5 senses? Or when we teach our youngest learners the alphabet, why not in that lesson introduce the concept of Braille or ASL, so these languages are naturally a part of the student's vernacular? Here's an excerpt of a great book that teaches the alphabet while emphasizing various senses. So for example, when we teach E is for elephant, let's also include Braille, and there's a way to sign E and elephant. In our pilot programs, the PK students were asked, how do you show peace without speaking? And they considered ASL as a form of speaking, as a language. It is this kind of understanding we hope young learners and adults will embrace. In fact, there's schools like Yale and Berkeley that consider knowing ASL as fulfilling their foreign language requirement. Another aspect of curriculum integration includes sharing ideas around creative problem solving and this idea of universal design, how thinking more broadly benefits everyone in society. So for example, while elevators in metro stations may have been mandated due to accessibility laws, outside of people in wheelchairs, those with strollers and the elderly use elevators as well. So the benefit of the design, the elevators, is ultimately benefiting the broader society, not just the disability community it was originally intended for. Arguably, innovation that perhaps addressed the needs of a particular disability group have largely benefited all of society. When we discuss notable figures, for example, and who've contributed to society, let's share if the person had a disability. The contribution may have nothing to do with the disability or maybe because of it. So for example, let's not only talk about Matisse and his paintings, but rather how he created a whole new form of art when he started using a wheelchair. FDR, arguably one of our most prolific presidents, comes to mind. And more recently, Amanda Gorman and President Biden, who identify with speech disorders, are other examples that can be shared. Let's provide historical context. Can we include the disability rights movement when we talk about the civil rights movement? There is a lot of intersectionality between historically marginalized groups. In fact, much of the disability rights movement was taken after the civil rights movement. Judy Heumann is often considered as the mother of the disability rights movement. She studied to be a teacher. She was born with polio and was in a wheelchair. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, you had to pass a medical exam besides a written one in order to get your teaching license. Judy's medical examination was in a building with no elevator, so she had a friend carry her up the stairs. During her medical examination, she was asked how she goes to the bathroom, if she ever wet herself. She didn't pass the medical examination because she was considered a fire hazard. She then sued the Board of Education. The title of this article here, and I apologize for the blurriness, comes from the 1970 Daily News, the 1970 Daily newspaper. And it's so poignant, right? You can be president with polio, but you can't be a teacher. What do you think of the stamp? What comes to my mind is that you're not considered to be a whole person if you're in a wheelchair. Only once you stand, there is hope and you reach normality. Ableism is so pervasive in our society, so rooted in our history.
So language and culture within the school environment. Based on the pre-session survey, one of the most desired takeaways was to gain insight in how to talk to children about disabilities. So let's spend some time on that now. Understanding, we'll keep it a bit broad, given again, the breadth of the disability community, and your approach will also depend on the age of the students, but we believe it's never too early to start teaching and talking about disability, even the youngest learners. When talking to students about disability, you would follow kind of many of the same guidelines that we reviewed earlier. And as with most identity discussions, create a safe space for them to share and encourage questions, as we just talked about with the case studies. When a student asks a question, you give them an open and clear answer. And I think it's important when talking about disabilities to reiterate that people with disabilities are not sick. There's nothing wrong with them. And that disability is just part of human diversity. As we discussed earlier, when we were talking about language, try to keep emotion out of it and refrain from using judgment words that attribute value to living with a disability, such as afflicted with or suffers from. As we all know, our choice of words as adults sends implicit messages to children. And it's important to have conversations with students about invisible disabilities. You can discuss neurodiversity and how all brains work differently, and that's part of the normal variation of humans. We all have different ways of thinking and communicating, including how we read social cues from others. And more often than not, I think we tend to focus on differences, but it's just as imperative, if not more, to kind of reiterate and focus on our similarities. Some things to try not to do, we talked about staring and shushing. And we do talk about this a lot with reference to children, because especially the younger ones, they're so pure and kind of just do and say what comes to them. So it's important, I think, to help students understand how to balance their curiosity with respect. Talk to them about how you can be curious, make eye contact, smile, but not stare. In terms of asking questions about disabilities, help students understand that questions are usually welcome, but occasionally may or may not be appropriate based on the context. And then in terms of helping them relate to their peers, we try to bring focus to the whole person and what they can do, not just the disability. And students with disability can often be left out because we don't know what's possible. But young people with a disability and their parents tend to be creative problem solvers and will let you know what can work. So again, as we talked about, encourage people to engage in those conversations. In terms of school culture, as Amrita discussed, we can do our best to get representation built in within the curricula through various books and media. One thing I do, however, want to call out is just to be mindful and watch out for misrepresentation and in those same areas and call them out. Often in stories, the villains will have some type of disability. Think about like Captain Hook, the Hunchback, and it happens quite a bit, especially with more historical media and books. So if that does occur, use that as an opportunity to discuss the misrepresentation with your students. Accommodations. Accommodations are so important. And I think we need to start reframing the conversation around them. Again, trying not to use words such as extra or special. Again, it's just better to be matter of fact. He will be doing this assignment this way, utilizing these tools. And I think acceptance from teachers regarding adaptive behaviors and accommodations is critical. So we should encourage students to use their accommodations as best we can. Often they're taking their cues from the adults. I think planning ahead is a great way to do that, and just work to ensure that students are able to meet their own needs when possible with dignity and discretion. I mentioned earlier about my son and how he has signals with his teachers, and it just helps him. You know, he's been very, very hesitant to use his accommodations over the years. He really does not like to stand out in any way, even though obviously he does, but he tries really hard not to. And I think giving them kind of subtle ways to get what they need is really important. A great way to signal your commitment to all learners is to consider putting an inclusive statement in your syllabus or class agreement if you have one, and just explicitly state you support all learners and their accommodations. And finally, in terms of culture in a school, we really encourage you to practice inclusivity in all aspects of student life, not just inside the four walls of the classroom. Students with disabilities can participate in extracurriculars, including sports and the arts. There are several sports that can be adapted to include people with disabilities alongside their peers. The same with performing and creative arts, student government groups, United Nations, all that stuff. This participation and inclusion is really vital to their overall community belonging. And there are lots of resources and organizations that can help you figure out ways to make it happen. And finally, I would encourage students to include their peers with disabilities socially. The attitude and approach within school will hopefully extend into their social interactions outside of school. Additional resources. So ensure your current libraries have books representing the different voices of disability. Again, we have many resources for a variety of age groups. If you'd like to speak to us individually, we're happy to help you out. And there are lots of opportunities for further exposure to the diversity of disabilities. So keep this in mind when planning things such as assemblies, field trips, etc. And as we discussed, it's really about a shift in culture and mindset. A truly inclusive environment needs buy-in from all stakeholders, right? So, and that requires kind of education and engagement on multiple levels. We really encourage schools to provide programs like this one to start the conversation among faculty and staff, and also to recognize the value of continuing that education and commitment around disability studies and awareness. Additionally, the conversation should be encouraged and extended into the home through parent and guardian programming. You know, as we talked about, I think in the very beginning, much of this is new for adults and families as well. So it can be exciting because we don't often get to learn about something at the same time as our children. And finally, for students, you know, as we all know, learning is really enhanced with experiential opportunities. So, you know, keep this in mind with assemblies, field trips. And I think now that we're opening up a bit more after the pandemic, we can look at service learning opportunities and other interactive ways to explore different communities and organizations that serve people with disabilities. You know, and just remember, when it comes to service learning, remind students it's not about being altruistic, but rather engaging with others and recognizing the contributions that everyone makes to society and how that benefits all of us.
Excuse me. Disability studies and awareness falls within SEL learning. We've created a curriculum with lesson plans leveraging these 5 pillars as a guide for educators who want to include disability awareness in the classrooms. Our lesson plans span various subject areas that are reinforced through different activities and throughout the school year. So for example, if in one session the students learn about interdependence, then perhaps the next they're working on a team building exercise in phys ed. Next slide, Kaya, please. We all know students learn in different ways, so we've applied various mediums and forms of education to maximize impact. This 3-prong approach provides the students a holistic and robust experience in understanding differences. We know teachers have enough to do, so our plans are tailored and slightly nuanced to include disability awareness. As you're aware, all of our work has been vetted by our advisors, who include teachers, professors of education, people with disabilities, and DEI specialists. I'm going to pause here because we're getting really close to 11 o'clock and we want to be respectful of your time. We have more to share regarding the curriculum, but we also have a feedback and reflection questionnaire that we hope you all could fill out. I think Kai just threw that in the chat. So please fill it out. That'd be really helpful for us. And then, as previously mentioned, we'll be here beyond 11. We do have some more slides regarding the curriculum if you're interested, and we'd be happy to share.
And I just, as I put that in the chat, I noted Kaylee's last comment in the chat, which is a great point. How she says she likes to say accessibility needs rather than special needs, which is great.
So just so that you all are clear, you are welcome to stay, but there's no shame if you need to go and you have something else going on in your classroom. Now is a breaking point for the end of the workshop. If you are not interested in hearing any more about what the curriculum could potentially offer you in your classroom. So we're grateful to Amrita and Kaya for leading this workshop today. You can get a recording from them. You'll get a recording from them probably Monday, and I'm going to say not tomorrow. So you'll get that, and then you're welcome to stay from here on as well.
Thank you so much. Really helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. We have a few folks that want to stay. Amrita, do you want me to share the presentation again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we start?
I have just sort of a general question of like, so I'm the learning specialist at my independent school, and I am coming from a special education or accessible education, as I like to call it now, background. I was a special ed teacher for many years. And so my experience with disability is more than most of the people in my school. And I'm trying to like figure out how to gently make some changes. And one question I have is, do you have any suggestions, and maybe you cover this in your curriculum, about how to respond when teachers might say something along the lines of, well, they won't be able to act like that or do that in the real world, and it's our job to prepare them for life and prepare them for the real world. And that's kind of a triggering statement for me. And I'm working on how can I respond to that without making them feel like they're being attacked for saying the wrong thing, or
Yeah. Wow, that's a tough one.
because typically I would just say, I hear what you're saying, and it's also our job to try to create people who are going to change society into a more inclusive space.
Right.
Like, why, and kind of even also similar comments about like, well, it's not going to be socially acceptable for him to carry a stuffed animal around when he's in middle school like it is and when he's in pre-K. But I'm like, well, what does socially acceptable mean? And if that's something that brings him comfort and helps him to access the rest of his day, how can we make space for that?
It's a great question, because I think what we're trying to do is shift all of it, right? We're trying to shift that it is acceptable
Yeah.
in middle school to do that, and shift society overall. Yeah, that's a good one. We have not been asked that yet. I'm trying to think what I would say if a teacher said that to me. That's tough. I think the world is changing. I think, you could probably make that argument in history about multiple cultural shifts overall, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder how that question has been answered in other conversations, similarly, because the world is changing, and I think the world is shifting towards more accessible, whether that be because of laws and legality, with the ADA and things like that, or culture, just a cultural shift. But the world is shifting. I think it's changing. It's becoming, recently LinkedIn changed. I guess they have, Amrita, what do they call it? They're like
it's like kind of LinkedIn is the professional networking site, and so they have certain attributes that you can say.
yeah.
So
And dyslexic thinking is now like a positive attribute. Like it's looked at as a positive. It brings a different way of looking at different creativity to the space. And so I think that's a great example maybe to use of how, well, actually, no, the world is changing. And so we need to prepare all students, because really our program is really about preparing all students. It's all students to understand disability and to understand differences, so that we can kind of create this cultural shift, not just in schools, but in the world and beyond. But I like that question. I'm going to definitely think about it more and have a better answer for next time. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on it. Please speak up, because like I said, I think it's a question that has been posed probably with lots of different cultural shifts over time.
I had a question. Sorry to interrupt. I was talking on what you just said too, just thinking about each child and each individual learns differently. So I think that's the biggest go-to. Like, we all learn differently, and we're providing our students the tools and methods that work for them. So just keeping in mind, like, it's no one size fits all. So having that mentality could really, like, it's not helpful. But I don't even know how to respond to that, other than just thinking like it's not a one size fits all thing. And although I have kids that seek out sensory, and again, it started with a stuffed animal, and to me now it's changed to a scarf, like a fluffy scarf. But I also feel like it's okay if that child loves a stuffed animal. What is wrong with that? But I do have a question. I have students, I'm a learning specialist at my school, and I have children that are considered low, academically. They're struggling with reading and specifically with reading phonics. We know that the pandemic has did a number. The conversations from some of the teachers have been pushing testing. And I feel like with interventions and all that being in place, we're seeing progress. So and I may be wrong, I'm totally open to, I can accept if I'm wrong, but my idea is we know what works for them. We know that interventions are providing that extra support. So why are we testing? Like if we know what's already helping them. And I don't know if that's the wrong mentality to have. I just feel like we're pushing testing and then I don't understand really the full picture of it.
When you say testing, are you talking about like evaluations of, or are you talking about academic testing?
Academic testings.
Yeah. I don't know. We're not really, that's kind of a little bit outside our purview. I think, I could give you my opinion, but it's just an opinion. So.
Oh, no, I'm open to anything. It's just, I come back, I have a background in it, but it's just like, I think that conversation's being brought up more and more now. And I'm just like, look, like there's also like factors to come in place within this. And then some of my students are from they speak a different language.
Right.
To play a part too. And I experienced that as a child. So I'm like very sensitive to think like, okay, well, you already know.
It's tough. I mean, I'm going through this. I will be going through this. Like, my son, he's going to take some standardized tests this year, and I'm like the actual act of filling in a bubble is so difficult for him that he wouldn't even be able to engage in the content. And it's like it's so interesting how our kind of traditional testing, the testing I always did as a kid, no problem, right? In terms of accessing the actual test and getting to the part where I'm really engaging in the content, there are so many kids that the way that the tests are done, whether it's language, right? They speak a different language or a physical disability or challenge, that it's already a non-starter, that they can't even engage with the content itself because of the structure of what it is, which is why we talk about, universal design for learning. I don't know. I think different schools are in different places in terms of how they're looking at that. It's such a complex question.
Sorry. I don't know if anybody else.
Sorry, I'm kind of outside of our purview, but I do, and I will say one other thing just about support. We struggle all the time in kind of quantifying how important support is. I mean, my son's we luckily live in New York, and we've had incredible early intervention help from the state from, when he was 9 months old and diagnosed. So I know as a parent, because I've been around communities of children, he had a stroke, and I've been around other children who have as well. And maybe initially his injury was more severe, but he's been lucky to have so much support from OTs, PTs, speech, all of this from us. We've been luckily able to have the time to spend on it, and I've seen kind of the same children over time, and I know that those interventions have really helped him, and so he's able to do things now maybe that other kids can't, whose original injuries weren't as severe. And I know that's because of therapy, but it's really hard to quantify that. And so I think there's a big challenge just in general in kind of being able to quantify and prove the effectiveness of a lot of support, even though a lot of us know intuitively, it's a big challenge. Something we talk about a lot just within our platform, like how do we prove that providing all of this education to all the kids really is changing their mindset and really helping to change society as a whole and shift that culture. It's something we're really trying to focus on, but I know it's hard, especially in the school environment when there's so many other things you have to get done.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, but again, these are great questions we're writing down. Any other kind of question? I think there's something in the chat. Amrita, do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah, we can.
If you guys want to take a look, we have some excerpts from our curriculum.
Yeah, so here's just basically an example of topics across grade levels of ideas, of lesson plan ideas that we've created. And I know I kind of rushed towards the end, but our lesson plans are vetted by some folks who've identified with disabilities, because that's really important to us, as well as teachers, because we don't have a teaching background, and professors of education. The next slide here, this is a sample of what our PK kindergarten units would look like. You'll see that concepts build upon one another and become gradually more complex over time. So going back to, we think about identity first, right? And then identity, and then kind of what makes you unique, how we all need each other, interdependency, what is disability, and then understanding diversity, and then the inclusion section is really more about inclusion, empathy, activism. How can you be more inclusive? So, one example of that for the younger learners could even be sharing scenarios with them and saying, okay, well, if someone's, at the playground, how would you then react? How do you show empathy? One of our outcomes from our pilot program was we created correspondence between the PK students at our pilot school and kindergarten school students at the Maryland School for the Blind, and they corresponded in Braille. So I learned how to use a Braille stylus. The kids came up with a note. They then sent that note in Braille to the students at MSB, and they had a couple of exchanges out of that, which we thought was really great. I mean, the pandemic's been challenging for kids to physically interact with each other, but at least there's one way of interacting through letter writing. Kind of the next slide. So here's an example of a lesson plan that we have. So we typically have objectives for the instructor or the teacher, assumptions, what we expect the kids to know prior to teaching this lesson plan, what we hope they take out of it, the procedure, materials, reflection questions, and then exit and assessment. In this particular plan, we introduce two percussionists. The students first listen to two percussionists comparing their sounds. Then they watch a video of the musicians. And then the students find out that one of the percussionists, Evelyn Glennie, is hard of hearing. And provided here is another link of Glennie when she was on Sesame Street. And in that video, Oscar the Grouch asks her why she's taken off her stinky shoes. And she explains that she plays the instrument by feeling the vibrations of the instrument. So we thought it was a great way for the students to understand that there's more than one way to do something. There's more than one way to appreciate music. We actually facilitated a virtual assembly with Glennie, who's based in the UK, at our pilot school, which was a nice way to wrap this lesson up. To give you a sense of just progression from, let's just say, from kindergarten to first and second grade, in PKK, we introduce a book that introduces a character in a wheelchair, with an emphasis on how characters with and without disabilities have more in common than not. In first and second grade, there's a lesson plan on the idea of universal design. So next slide, Kaya. On universal design and how ramps not only benefit people with wheelchairs, but strollers, the elderly, and so forth. So here, after that discussion, the students build their own ramps with different material, and reinforcing disability studies, as well as tactile and problem solving. Building ramps, for example, could be a lesson that can be elevated for older students, bringing in elements of physics into the lesson plan as well. At another pilot school, we did this presentation that we did for you all live in front of their faculty and staff. And in our pre-session survey, a lot of the faculty and staff talked about how they felt that their campus is really inaccessible. So in our presentation, we talked about how they can create this into a service learning opportunity. Have the students, these are like older kids now, middle school kids, have them review the ADA, and then come up with ways on how to make their campus more accessible. And now the school's actually doing that. And those students are putting a proposal together that they're going to present to the principal of that school, which we thought was another great takeaway from that lesson. Does anyone have any questions? Comments?
Will we have access to this PowerPoint or like some of those slides that you were just showing with an overview of some sample lessons? Like I'd love to be able to bring that back to some of my team members to see, like, is that something, or do you have anything that's like available to the public that we can show?
Yeah, we have, Kai and I are trying to constantly figure this out, but we do have a handful of lesson plans that we'd share, to answer your question, that you guys can take a look at, just to kind of see what our approach is. Just note that they're going to be taken out of context, because we are intentional that, there's a progression and they build and the ideas build over time. But yeah, we'd be happy to share, a few of them with you. Just maybe if you could send us a note or something so we can do that, we'll be happy to just email us. It's interesting. We did this, and we piloted this at a number of schools. One was at my daughter's school, and we actually had at my daughter's school the foreign language teacher, the Spanish teacher, interested in teaching about this, which was interesting because it's not something that we thought about, right? And so we actually found Spanish books in Braille that she could show, and then to her students. And if you think about it, it's learning a new language, and you're learning about this topic in a sense too, right? There's a whole language and etiquette aspect of this. So it was kind of neat for her to introduce Spanish to her students, but then introduce this concept alongside with that.
And she also, a number of our lesson plans have books associated with them, because it's just, books are such a great way, picture books are such a great way to tell a story. I mean, and so even though some of them were for younger students, we were able to find them in Spanish, and it was good with the older kids, because the morals behind some of these picture books, I mean, even adults can benefit from it, but sometimes kids feel like the language is younger, but you could use them kind of in a 4th or 5th grade because it's in Spanish. So it's like they're kind of learning two different things. They're working on their Spanish, but they're also getting kind of a lesson, on disability awareness as well. So there's lots of different ways it can be weaved in at all different kind of levels of ages and everything.
Yeah, we actually started a disability parents association, like a subgroup at my daughter's school. And that was really interesting too, because my daughter's now in 1st grade. So, and the school goes through high school. And so it was really interesting because we were relatively new to the school, but we had parents from all 3 divisions, the middle school and the high school, all interested, looking for community. And, they all also had concerns of some of the school's approach to inclusion. And so it's been an interesting journey from that perspective as well. Hearing parents, and some of whom identify themselves with disabilities, and some who have children with disabilities.
Well, thank you all. I don't know if you have any more questions for us. We appreciate you staying on so long.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.